So let us begin the webinar by first looking at the training schedule spread across the 4 weeks. Week 1 and week 2 have already been covered. Today we are here at week 3 to see just how Applications Manager can be used to optimize the performance of your application and servers from a DevOps perspective. And finally, on April 18th, week 4, we will explore certain key admin features that are necessary for IT personnel dealing in the application performance monitoring sphere. A quick recap of what we have seen so far. In week 1, we covered application discovery and dependency mapping, and then we saw how to logically group different apps and servers based on the business service or different geographies. And then we also took a look at the performance insights of several popular application and database servers. Week 2 was primarily about website monitoring that included the URL monitor, the URL sequence monitor, end user experience monitoring with the help of the real browser monitor, as well as website content or website defacement monitor. So today, we will focus on exploring just how Applications Manager can be used to optimize the performance of your applications. In weeks 1 and 2, we had taken a sample web application and we saw how Applications Manager's capabilities fit into different aspects of this particular web application. And I'm assuming the points mentioned in this slide have already been covered. So what we are going to see today is when different components of a web app interact with each other, what can you do with the transaction information that can be retrieved from these web apps transactions? That will be the primary focus of today's agenda, where we will see how to ensure complete visibility and insight into your applications. We will try to identify the individual application components that could be responsible for a potential threat to services, and also try to drill down to the SQL query level to find out if there are any SQL queries that are slowing down your web application. And then we will also be seeing different metrics involved with monitoring the JVM. So let us quickly begin with the first topic on today's agenda, that is to analyze and measure the performance of your web applications. Applications Manager facilitates this with the help of the APM Insight module, and this requires an agent to be downloaded and installed in your machine so as to collect and push this data into Applications Manager. This agent is available for Java, .NET, as well as Ruby on Rails applications. That is, you can use the Java agent in order to collect and see metrics for all Java-based apps, and similarly for .NET and Ruby on Rails-based apps as well. So let us browse through a few slides, get an overview of what APM Insight can do for you, and then let us jump to the product and try configuring it for ourselves. So when we talk about APM Insight, it essentially means that the metrics collected and displayed here go deeper than actual basic monitoring. So when we talk about server-side problems, it is only fitting to understand what are the transaction level details going on in the background. This could be all the SQL queries being executed, different transaction traces, background traces, so on and so forth. So let us, at the very beginning, take a look at this sample representation that you can see on your screens. So this is how the APM Insight screen looks like when the data starts populating in the product. So the overview tab lists the Apdex score that we will discuss in one quick moment, and also the average response times, throughputs, and response times broken by tiers. So individual component information can be retrieved and seen in the APM Insight module of Applications Manager. So we spoke about the Apdex score. Let us discuss a few more things about the Apdex score. So the Apdex score is actually an open standard ranging from 0 to 1, which gives us an idea about how the experience of a user has been with respect to a particular web application. Now, if the value is 0, it implies that the user is disgusted with the performance. If it is 1, it means that the user is incredibly happy. So ideally, the value swings somewhere between 0 to 1, and it is used to actually give us a fair evaluation of how the experience of the web application has been for the typical user. Next, speaking about the transaction level metrics, these two images on your screen should be able to give you a clear picture about the component-wise split up of each transaction that is occurring within your servers. So here you can see that the recent 5 slow transactions are listed like this. So individual transactions as well as their corresponding response time. And similarly, top 5 transactions, transactions by slow response time, transactions by different metrics can be retrieved and seen within the Applications Manager module. So let us go back quickly to the product and see how to configure an agent. We will begin first by taking the .NET agent as an example. So what I'm going to do is switch to a different machine right here, and I'm going to download and install the .NET agent, which can be found here in this link. So within the Applications Manager website, right here, you can find the APM Insight agent for Java, .NET, as well as Ruby on Rails. So you have to install this agent in your machine and then start this agent so as to collect and push data into Applications Manager. What I'm going to do now is minimize the screen and open and install the APM Insight .NET agent, which I had downloaded previously. So I click on install and it begins the installation wizard. Now the reason I'm showing the installation process of the .NET agent is to make sure that the configuration changes that are done here are thorough for everybody else. So right here you can see you can choose just me if you are the only person who will be accessing this .NET agent in your machine, or everyone if you want to keep open access. So I'm going to browse and change the folder where I want to install this. What I have done is created a folder called .NET agent inside my Applications Manager installation setup. So I'm saving this agent right here. Click on next, and this option right here by default is crossed out. What this means is oftentimes profilers installed in your machine might actually prevent the .NET agent from operating properly. So when you see an error like that throw up, remember to check this box and the error should be solved. Click on next, and remember here for the .NET agent, what I have done is I have taken my IIS server as the .NET app, which I am going to monitor with the help of Applications Manager .NET agent. So when the agent is installed, it automatically restarts the IIS server. So I'm clicking on next, and you can see that the .NET agent is getting installed. Now, while the installation process happens, you will see that the .NET configuration window also pops up on the side. Now we will see the different configuration aspects of the .NET agent right here on this window. So here I'm going to enter the host details where I want this data to be pushed, the port number, specify a name, and then click on save. Now this should complete the installation. Anyway, while this installation happens, let us go back to the presentation and see a few more slides before we come back to the product. So when the agent starts collecting data and pushing it within Applications Manager, you should be able to see a screen like this one. So here we are on the inside of the WebTransaction tab of the APM Insight module. Now what this image shows is that the transactions are sorted here by their slowest average response time, and on the right is the individual transactions component wise split up, Apdex score, response time, and throughput details. Furthermore, within web transactions, if you scroll down further, you will be able to see transaction Apdex scores and then transaction response time and throughputs broken down by components involving servlets, JSPs, and filters. So we just installed the agent and configured the host server. Let us speak about the agent for a few slides and then go back to the product and see whether data collection is happening. So what the agent essentially does is it helps you configure the different metrics or different changes that you want to see within the APM module. Like for example, by default, the Apdex threshold in Applications Manager is the agent is set at 0.5. So based on this default Apdex threshold, the Apdex score is calculated. Similarly, you can configure the sampling factor. By default, it is set at 5. Now, when we talk about sampling factor, what it means is if the sampling factor is set at 5, then 1 out of every 5 transactions will be captured and the data for that particular transaction will be shown within the Applications Manager UI. And when we configure this agent, as we saw in the configuration wizard that just opened up, you will find there are 6 different tabs, each with different configurable fields that we will have to fill in with the information that is necessary to be put in order to retrieve and see data in Applications Manager. And these tabs include the General tab, Trace Settings, Transaction Merge, App Filters, Background Transaction, and Advanced. We will be seeing each of these tabs in detail when we move through the product. So here we are in the product once again. And right here is my .NET application that we just created in the .NET configuration wizard. Now, if I click and go inside, you will find that there is no data inside this particular application. Now, this is to be expected because we haven't performed any transactions yet. So only if we perform the transactions should we be able to see that data right here. So let us go back and perform some transactions. What I have done is I have my IIS server right here. What I'm going to do is open a sample app that is hosted on my IIS server. And we are going to perform a few basic transactions right here so as to make sure that this data gets populated within the Applications Manager UI. All right, a few more transactions. So we make sure that there is enough data within Applications Manager to discuss about. Remember, the more the transactions that you do, the more the data presented within Applications Manager. Right now, I'm just performing some random transactions so as to generate some data to discuss. All right, so let us go and explore the .NET agent configuration tab, the remaining tabs, until this data gets populated and pushed within Applications Manager. All right. So we spoke about the general tab where we enter the host details, the port details, and if you want to use the secure HTTPS protocol, you can check this box to enable it. And right here is the application name column where you can avail the option of monitoring multiple monitors. And as is given under the brackets here, which suggests us to use the app filters. Now, when you click on the app filters tab, you will find that the different apps that are hosted on my IIS server are listed right here. And I can choose any or all of these based on what app I want to monitor with the APM Insight agent. So I'm going to leave it as it is as default. And we will discuss further about the other tabs. The Apdex threshold, as I said before, is set at 0.5 by default. And here are the options to capture database SQL queries, SQL transaction traces, and CPU time. So if you check these boxes, this information will also be displayed in the UI. And then there is the option to enable login with the option to choose the severity of that particular log. Going to the advanced tab, the advanced tab again allows us to configure the sampling factor. By default, it's 5. If you have any sensitive information to be hidden, you check this box and enter the parameters that are to be hidden. And then if your organization uses a firewall or a proxy, check this box and enter the relevant details right here, and you should be good to go. Speaking about trace settings next, if you enable transaction tracing, the traces will be pushed to Applications Manager where you should be able to see the data. And the stack trace threshold for SQL in transaction trace, by default, the value is set at 3. Now remember, the stack trace for the SQL transaction will only be taken when this particular threshold mentioned here is breached. Similarly, when the threshold for the component count is beyond 30, only then the trace will be taken. Now, there are different components involved in different transactions, right? So when the component count exceeds beyond 30, only then the trace will be taken. Of course, these options are all customizable and you can change them anytime you want. And finally, CPU time threshold, which is again set by default at 60, and you can change it anytime you want based on your monitoring requirements. Background transactions, transaction merge. Let us speak about transaction merge next. So what transaction merge essentially does is, let me open a notepad and demonstrate with the help of this notepad. So let me take a sample URL type, say amazon.com, and let us assume John is a visitor to this particular website. Similarly, say Jacob is another visitor. So what I'm going to do here is, when we consider this particular URL, now we can safely assume that John and Jacob, these are dynamic values that are user names that could vary from time to time. So what I'm going to do is, copy this pattern, close the notepad, paste it here. Now what this means is, the URL patterns that begin with Amazon and then a username will be grouped under users. So similarly, you can add more patterns to match and then enter them here and click on save. So this should allow you to match different patterns. That is, a particular set of patterns will be grouped and replaced with a common URL. So that is what the transaction merge tab does for us. So what I'm going to do now is close this. and come back here to the product, refresh it, and that is the data that we had performed transactions for are reflected here. So here I am in the overview tab, and this is precisely the image that we saw in the presentation of the overview tab, where you can see that the .NET agent has successfully collected and pushed information. So this is the Apdex score, looks pretty ideal at 0.7, the average response time, the throughput, and when I scroll down, there is data about the Apdex score, the average response time, the throughput, and then here again from the screenshot in the presentation, the recent 5 slow transactions, the top 5 slow transactions. Now when you click this, it will take us to this transaction traces, but then again we will come back and explore the other tabs in a quick moment. Let us again take a look at the web transaction tab that we saw in the presentation. Right here are the different transactions sorted by the slowest average response time. You can use these filters to sort out based on whichever requirement you have and see it based upon your desire. So what I'm going to do is take a few transactions, maybe this one, click on it, and on the right is the corresponding detailed information about that particular transaction, the component-wise split up of that transaction, the Apdex score of the particular transaction. So this was about the overview and web transaction tabs of the .NET agent. So what we're going to do now is see how the Java agent is configured. So once we see the Java agent, we will see what the agent collects. I mean, in terms of the Java agent, what are the metrics collected and how is the UI when the Java agent pushes the data to Applications Manager. So what I'm going to do in case of the Java agent, it works the same way as the .NET agent. You download, you install, and then you configure it. So here is the help document that talks about the APM Insight Java agent. Now remember, getting the Java agent started is pretty much easy, perhaps easier than the .NET agent, because all you have to do, as is given here, for example, if you want to configure the Java agent for the Tomcat server, remember, in the Tomcat configuration console, all you have to do is enter the Java agent's installation path under the Java options. Similarly, for IBM WebSphere servers, within the WebSphere application server type, you will have the configuration tab. Now where you will have to enter the Java virtual machine arguments. Now remember, wherever you see the JVM argument configuration in the server console, may it be the JBoss server or the WebSphere server or the Tomcat server, that is precisely where you have to enter the Java agent's installation path. Here is the APM Insight Java agent for JBoss. So as you can see from the help, for each different monitor, you will have to open that particular server's console and in the JVM argument specify the Java agent's installation path. And once you do that, the agent should be installed and should be able to collect and push metrics within Applications Manager. So what I have done is I have already installed a Java agent and made it to push metrics into Applications Manager. So let us open this particular app, which basically is monitored with the help of the Java agent. And when I open this, you can see in your screen the same tabs and an extra JVM tab for the Java agent. So here you can see the overview of the particular app that is being monitored with the Java agent. What I have done here is, for .NET, we had taken the IIS server as the .NET app that we monitored with the .NET agent. Now, the app that we used the Java agent to monitor is a version of Applications Manager itself. So we have considered an instance of Applications Manager as the Java app and used the Java agent to monitor the Applications Manager instance and push it to our parent Applications Manager, which is here right on our screens. So this is the overview information again. about the average response time, the slow transactions, top 5 transactions, and error transactions. So the web transaction tab is what we have seen already. So what we are going to see next is, for example, I click here, and again, the data corresponding to that particular transaction is right here. Now, what we are going to do now is go back to the the presentation again, and see a few more slides before we come back to the product again. So the next slides that we are going to see will be about identifying which particular SQL query is slowing down your web application. Now, take a look at this image, for example. Now, this is the database tab that we haven't seen yet, but we will, and the information present within the database tab. So again, the slowest transactions right here, and on the right is the transaction information in detail. So you can identify the slow database calls, the overall usage of the database, and the complete performance of the database. Now, when we spoke about drilling down to the SQL query level, this image should give us a fair idea about what we mean when we speak about tracing transactions down to the SQL query level. As you can see in this screen, the summary, the trace details, and the SQL statements can be seen here. So you click on a particular SQL query and you get further information about that particular query and how much time it has taken. And so this assessment of the various SQL queries becomes really valuable to point out the exact component or the query that is causing a particular performance bottleneck. So this is precisely what the DevOps IT personnel can make use of to understand what queries, what transactions are preventing the optimal performance of your particular server. So once again, back to the product right here, and this is the database tab with the database information, just as you saw in the presentation. So this is a transaction. I click on the transaction, and again, on my right is the information of that particular transaction, the database operation response time, the throughputs. Similarly, for every transaction, the corresponding data is presented on the right. So this is about the database transactions. Let us take a look at the traces right here. So you can see different transaction traces right here, again with the information of the particular traces right here, represented in text, numeric, as well as the graphical format. So I click on a particular trace, and here I can see the slowest components and what is the duration taken for that component, meaning why the component has been slow. Here the trace details, and finally the SQL statements. We will come back and revisit these tabs when we speak about the background traces and the error traces. But before that, once again, back to the presentation and a couple of more slides, which will be about identifying the Java components that are responsible for a particular performance bottleneck. Now, take a look at this image. The information presented in the UI for any monitor is just as important. In fact, what's more important is to understand what is the transaction or what is the communication between different components of your app that is happening in the background. So when you are working in the production environment, this is precisely the information that you would want to have. And that is why this agenda is directed at enabling DevOps to make the best use of their apps and servers. This is facilitated further with the help of the error tab that is present within the APM Insight module. Of course, we will be revisiting those tabs, as I said earlier. Here you can see the error traces. Clicking on each trace will again yield more information about that particular error trace. So back to the product, and here. Now that I clicked on the error tab, you can see the different errors along with their response time and average response time listed here. Let me click on any error, this one, and as we discussed, right here are the slowest components, the different queries that are slow, the duration taken by them, the trace details that we discussed about. So you can see that all the details about the SQL query, the traces are right here. And the SQL statements, this is precisely the query, the SQL query, and the execution time. So this is what we meant when we spoke about drilling down to the SQL query level. So this becomes quite easy for the DevOps personnel to identify SQL queries and transactions that are preventing your app from delivering a smooth and optimal performance. So what we are going to see next is, again, back to the presentation and to find out how to monitor JVM performance. Now, if you noticed, we had skipped the JVM tab in the product precisely for this reason, that is to see the JVM performance metrics in the presentation one, and with this context, we will go back to the product and explore the JVM tab. So when we speak about the JVM metrics, it includes the JVM CPU usage, the memory heap and non-heap memory details, the class counts, the just-in-time compiler. But not only this, it will also reveal information about garbage collection, while also enabling users to trigger garbage collection right from the product UI. Now, besides garbage collection, obviously, you will need to see the thread details when dealing with JVM. So when we speak about thread details, the individual threads, the time taken by individual threads, and how many threads are blocked, what is the waiting time, these kind of details can be seen with the help of the JVM metrics, that is the thread details. So back to the product, and here is the JVM tab. So inside the JVM tab, as we discussed in the presentation right now, the JVM CPU usage, the runtime memory, heap memory, non-heap memory. Now pay attention to this part, because the JVM metrics captured within APM Insight are right here in your screens. But beyond the JVM metrics collected with the help of the Java agent, Applications Manager in fact has a separate monitor called the Java Runtime Monitor, which also serves the same purpose. Now, of course, with the APM Insight agent, the metrics collected go beyond just the normal monitoring for other servers. So it is totally up to the user to choose whether the Java agent to collect JVM metrics is the way to go, or the alternative Java Runtime Monitor is desirable. Of course, we will see the Java Runtime Monitor also quickly in a few moments, but only after we have seen the garbage collection, the thread, and the configuration tabs. So here, the garbage collection details are presented right here. You can see the same for scavenge and mark sweep of the particular JVM. And similarly, the thread details right here, split up and represented graphically with live threads, daemon threads, peak and sleeping threads. The configuration detail of your JVM. So this is about the JVM tab. So I believe we have seen the different tabs. What we are going to do now is, again, move to the presentation and see what's next, which is the Java Runtime Monitor. Now, the Java Runtime Monitor does the same thing as the JVM metrics collected within APM Insight, but then again, this is a separate monitor that you can use with the Applications Manager base product, whereas the APM Insight is an add-on to Applications Manager. Now, the Java Runtime Monitor includes details such as the connection time, the memory details, and heap and non-heap memory details, and also garbage collection, where, as I said, with these options, if you can see my cursor in the presentation screen, you can trigger garbage collection immediately from the UI itself. And besides garbage collection, here is the sample image for the threads, where you can see that the different threads are right here, the value and threshold options present here. So let us go back to the product once again and see how to configure the Java runtime monitor. So what I'm going to do is click on Java runtime monitor right here. So adding the Java runtime monitor is pretty much the same as adding any other monitor, and I'm sure we are all quite familiar with how to add and group monitors from parts 1 and 2 of this series. So what I'm going to do is show you this Java runtime monitor that I've added previously. So this is what the inside of the Java runtime monitor once you add will look like. So here is the overview tab that lists some information about the connection time and the attributes, the memory usage, system memory, process memory, heap and non-heap memory, and the VM statistics. So this is the overview screen of the Java runtime monitor. Let us see what the garbage collection screen has. So this is the collection of the summary of the garbage collector with the individual attributes. Now, as I said, clicking on this button will instantly trigger Java garbage collection. And here is the data for the mark sweep garbage collector. And if you click on this button right here, you should be able to see in a new pop-up the impact of this garbage collection activity as is seen on this screen right here. So similarly, clicking on the view impact will show you the impact details for the scavenge. And let us go and click the threads tab, where, as we saw in the presentation, these are the thread statistics. And what is important to note here is with Applications Manager, users can directly generate or view the thread dump right from the UI of the product. So clicking on the view thread dump automatically opens up this thread dump window where you can see each different thread that is in operation and its state, whether it's waiting, running, the CPU time, whether it's blocked, and whether it's waited. So all the details you want about threads, that is every single thread in action, can be seen just by clicking the view thread dump button right here in your UI. Then again, the configuration tabs, which will list out the configuration of your Java runtime monitor, and finally the action tab. Now this action tab is again where you can view thread dumps, generate heap dumps directly from the UI, and perform garbage collection. Now let us go back to the presentation for one quick moment and see about that actions tab that we just saw. So the actions tab, it helps you configure automatic actions to trigger thread dumps and heap dumps based on predetermined thresholds, which will trigger the action configured. So consider this example, this screen, where you see that when you create an action, what it essentially means is when you have a threshold value set up for a particular attribute of your Java runtime monitor, and you associate an automatic action when the threshold is breached. Say, when the threshold is breached, you would want to see the thread dumps being generated for analysis. So this action can be configured automatically for that particular attribute. So you know that besides going and clicking and manually generating the thread dumps or heap dumps from the product, you can set these as automatic corrective actions in case particular attribute thresholds are violated. But we are not going to discuss in detail about these actions because that is part of the agenda for next week, that is April 18th, where we will see, among other things, how to configure actions, automatic actions, and alarms. So with this, we have come to the end of today's webinar. Let us take 2 quick moments to evaluate what we have seen in today's session. So 2 quick minutes to go through these questions and come up with answers in your minds. After a brief moment, we will discuss the answers and then proceed with the QA. All right, so here are the answers to these questions. I hope all of you got all of the questions right, or at least most of it correct. So that was a brief evaluation of what we saw today in the Applications Manager week 3 of the webinar. Remember, if any parts of this session is not clear or you have any doubts, you can ask those questions or hit us up for a personalized demo anytime, and our representatives will be glad to assist you with your needs.